9 years ago, the man I was supposed to marry stood in my own mother's house and told me my sister could give him a life I never could. He wasn't wrong that her name was on the building he walked into every morning. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, is whose money had built it. My name is Amara, and this is the story of how the man who left me for my sister spent 9 years building his life inside a business I quietly owned the entire time. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. His name was Tobena. We were engaged for almost 2 years, planning a wedding that kept getting postponed. First for money, then for his job, then for reasons I told myself were reasonable. I worked as a junior auditor at a small firm downtown, the kind of job that paid the bills and nothing more. I was also, quietly, building something on the side, a financial consulting practice for small business owners, mostly women running shops and salons who'd been turned away by bigger firms. Nobody in my family took it seriously. To them, it was something I did on weekends, not a future. My older sister, Chiamaka, was the opposite of overlooked. She had opened an event and lifestyle establishment 2 years earlier, the kind of place that hosted everything from bridal showers to corporate launches, and it had made her the pride of every family gathering. My mother introduced her at every function as my daughter who owns her own business. She introduced me as my daughter who is still finding herself. Tobena noticed who got the warm welcome and who didn't. Slowly, his attention started drifting toward the room where the warmth was. It started with small remarks. Chiamaka thinks I should be more ambitious. Chiamaka says, a woman with real vision builds something people can see, not spreadsheets nobody looks at. Chiamaka says, I told myself he simply admired my sister's success. I told myself it was natural for a man planning a future to be impressed by someone building something tangible. I told myself many things, because the truth waiting underneath them was harder to face. The truth was that Tobena had stopped looking at me the way a man looks at the woman he plans to marry. He started looking past me, toward whichever room my sister occupied. He began attending her events as a guest, then as someone helping coordinate them, then as someone who seemed to know her schedule better than he knew mine. I noticed, and like a woman standing very still so the storm won't notice her, I said nothing. I remember the day clearly because it was 2 weeks before our traditional engagement ceremony, the formal event where both families exchange their blessing, not something either family takes lightly. I had left work early, planning to surprise Tobena with lunch from the place we used to go before either of us could afford anywhere nicer. I let myself into his flat with the key he'd given me a year before, and I heard voices, his and my sister's, coming from the sitting room, low and warm in a way that made my stomach tighten before my mind caught up. I told myself it was innocent. Family helping family. I opened the door anyway. They were sitting close on the sofa, a folder of event contracts between them, his hand resting over hers on top of the papers in a way that had nothing to do with business. They looked up, and in the half-second before either of them spoke, something in me that had been holding it's not what it looks like, Tobena said, standing too fast. I set my bag down carefully, the way you set things down when your hands have started shaking, and you don't want anyone to see. Then tell me what it is, I said. Chiamaka didn't stand. She rarely did. Not for me. We've been working closely on the new venue launch, she said. Tobena has good instincts. I needed someone I could trust. That isn't what I'm asking, I said, and I looked at him. Tell me the truth. He looked at the floor. That was the answer. How long? I asked, and I didn't mean the venue launch. Chiamaka answered for him, the way she always answered for people in our family. Long enough for him to understand what kind of future actually makes sense. A future without me, I said. A future with direction, she said. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you must have seen it coming. I looked at Tobena, waiting for him to disagree, to defend the 2 years we'd spent planning a life together. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and said, I think it's best if we end the engagement. I didn't want it to happen like this. The floor seemed to tilt the way floors do when the ground you trusted turns out to have been hollow the whole time. You're choosing my sister, I said. By the time I finished the sentence, it wasn't even a question. I'm choosing a life that's actually going somewhere, he said. It was a cruel thing to say, It is still a cruel thing to remember, 9 years later. The traditional ceremony was cancelled within days. Within a month, everyone knew, not because I told them, but because Tobena and Chiamaka were now seen together at family events, sitting side by side, as though nothing unusual had taken place. I expected my mother to be furious. Instead, she called to talk sense into me. "Your sister has built something real," she said. "A man wants to attach himself to vision, Amara. You cannot blame him for wanting more than promises." My father, a man who rarely involved himself in anything, said only, "Family is family. Do not let pride cost you what's left of it." No one asked if I was eating. No one asked if I was sleeping. They asked me to be gracious. They asked me not to make the next family wedding uncomfortable. They asked me, without ever saying it directly, to disappear quietly so the family photograph could stay tidy. I attended that wedding, Chiamaka's eventually, to Tobena, and sat near the back while my mother beamed from the front row. I said nothing. I left before the reception ended. And for the first time in my life, I made a decision entirely for myself, without asking permission from a single person at that table. I was going to stop performing for people who had already decided my role in the story. I was going to write a different one. I left the auditing firm within the year and rented a small office above a tailoring shop, far enough from my family's usual circles that I stopped running into people who knew our business. I poured every evening and every weekend into the consulting practice that had once been dismissed as a hobby. The first 2 years were lonely in ways I still find difficult to describe simply. I worked through holidays. I turned down invitations I knew would only be filled with questions about Tobena and Chiamaka's growing success. I learned to sit with silence instead of running from it. But there is a strange gift in being underestimated by everyone who matters to you. Eventually, you stop performing for them entirely, and all that performance energy goes somewhere else. Mine went into the work. My small consulting practice grew into a firm that specialized in restructuring struggling small businesses, the unglamorous, overlooked clients no big firm wanted to bother with. I understood them because I had once been dismissed the same way they had. By year 4, I had 8 staff. By year 6, I had quietly begun acquiring small, distressed businesses and turning them around. Not publicly, not loudly, simply effectively. I kept my name off press releases. As far as my family knew, I was still the daughter finding herself. In year 9, my operations director placed a folder on my desk during our weekly review. "Acquisition opportunity," she said. "Event and lifestyle venue. Strong reputation. Very weak financials. Owner is quietly looking for a buyer before the creditors force a public sale." I opened the folder. I recognized the logo before I finished reading the business name. It was my sister's establishment. Chiamaka had expanded too aggressively after the wedding, taking on debt to open 2 additional locations that never became profitable. The flagship venue, the one Tobena now managed day to day as her business partner and husband, was bleeding the most money of all. I sat with that folder for a long time before I said a single word to my team. I want to be honest about something. I did not pursue this acquisition out of revenge. The numbers made sense entirely on their own. Strong brand, recoverable operations, good staff being failed by leadership stretched too thin. My acquisitions committee approved it on merit, before most of them knew my family connection to the seller. But I won't pretend my hands were perfectly steady when I signed the offer letter. The closing meeting was held in a conference room downtown. I arrived with my legal team. The acquiring entity carried my company's name, not my own, by design. My family had no idea I owned anything beyond a small consulting business. Chiamaka walked in first, exhausted, thinner than I remembered, worn down by months of negotiating with the bank. Behind her walked Tobena, carrying the operational documents for the handover, his tie slightly loosened. The confidence I remembered from 9 years ago noticeably dimmed. Tobena saw me before Chiamaka did. He froze mid-step. "Amara?" Chiamaka turned, confused, then pale. "What is she doing here?" My lawyer slid the agreement across the table. "Miss Amara Obi is the founder and majority owner of the acquiring company." The room went silent in the particular way a room goes quiet when an entire story everyone believed quietly rearranges itself. I will tell you what I wanted to say in that room. I wanted to remind Chiamaka of every dismissive remark, Every comment about my spreadsheets nobody looks at, every wedding I sat through near the back row. I wanted to ask Tobena if direction had been worth what it cost him. I said none of it. What I said was, this business has good people working in it who deserve stability. That's why we're here, nothing more. Chiamaka signed with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. Tobena stayed behind after the others left, the way people do when hoping for a private ending to a public story. I had no idea, he said quietly. All these years working here, I never knew it was you behind any of this. I imagine you didn't, I said. You built all this. He looked around the room, and then at me, as though seeing both clearly for the first time. I used to think you'd never become anything beyond what everyone said you were. I know, I said. So did I, for a while. He asked, carefully, if there was any chance for us to talk, really talk, after everything. I told him gently that some doors close not from bitterness, but from peace, and that I had finally found mine. He nodded, and for the first time since that afternoon 9 years ago, I watched him understand exactly what he had given up. People often ask if buying my sister's establishment felt like winning. It didn't. Not the way I once imagined it would. By the time it happened, I had already won the thing that actually mattered. I no longer needed either of them to regret what they did. My parents reached out after the news spread through the family. I answered this time, not with anger, but without the old hunger to be approved of. I have made a slow, careful peace with my sister since then, on my own terms, the way real peace usually arrives, quietly, and later than you'd like. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The people who overlook you while you are building are not always wrong about who you were then. They are only wrong about who you would become. Protect your dream even when the people closest to you don't believe it deserves protecting. One day, it might be the very thing that outlasts everyone who doubted it. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because we have so many more on the way.